and welcome to the Ignorance Project. Today, I'm very, very excited about having someone near and dear to my heart, Mr. David Person. So I'll just kick it off and let you introduce yourself and take it from there.
All right. Well, the first order of business is that I've known you since before you and your brother,
Absolutely, yes.
because your parents and I were in college together.
Mm-hmm.
They are my dear friends, Keith and Hyacinth. And so that's the most important thing.
Absolutely.
After that, everything else is just secondary.
Yes. And, I think as I get older, just reflecting a lot about my life and my childhood and community, and you're definitely family for me. And I've been thinking a lot about things that I wish I'd done when I was younger, like utilize the resources around me. Growing up in Huntsville and being in the Oakwood community, there were so many people around that I wish I'd asked more questions about their life and what they did and why they did it. And in part, that's how the Ignorance Project came to be. Of course, getting out information that people are uncomfortable asking about or don't know how to seek, but also kind of exploring a part of myself where, just exploring my curiosity about different things and different career paths and, different ways you can live life. So thank you again for agreeing to do this.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, it's my pleasure. So, just a quick bio on myself.
Mm-hmm.
I've been a media personality, and I guess the in vogue term these days is content creator. I've been in that business, the business of creating media content as a personality and as a producer and director for almost 40 years, pretty close to 40 years.
Wow, yeah.
As a professional, if you want to count my years in college, then definitely over 40 years. And I've done it for newspapers, I've done it for radio stations and TV stations, podcasts, social media sites, documentaries.
Wow.
Just a wide range of things. And I'm still in a lot of those areas to this day, even though, of course, a lot has changed over the past 40 years. So that's what I do for a living. And it's also part of what I do as a passion. And then I've also been blessed to integrate one of my other passions into my media work, which is social justice, addressing social justice issues. So that pretty much sums up my professional life in a nutshell.
You're right. And we're going to get more into that soon. But before we do, I want to talk a little bit about your background. We are alumni from the same university, Oakwood University.
That's right.
Yes, which is an HBCU that I'm very passionate about. And you studied journalism or communications? I'm really not sure.
I studied communication. I got a bachelor's degree in communication, and interestingly enough, a minor in theology.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that. Okay.
Yeah, it's not readily evident if you spend it time around me. I'm not really the theological type, probably, in a lot of ways, but then in some settings I am. So I guess it just depends on where I am, I guess.
Absolutely. And I think when you think about theology too, I always think it's more about information, right? It means that you were curious historically about biblical things and, world religion. There's a lot that theology can encompass. So
that's right.
I can see that in you, honestly. So you majored in communications. So what sparked that interest?
Well, that's a great question. I have been what I call a radio geek. A radio geek since I was a little child. I just, for whatever reason, I was enamored with radio as a child, and also even not just to enamored with radio, but even with other facets of broadcasting, TV news, but radio in particular. And so that was, I grew up in Chicago, as you know, because that's your hometown as well.
Yeah.
And Chicago is, in my estimation, especially, in the 60s and 70s,
Mm.
early 80s, it was probably one of the best cities to grow up in if you enjoyed radio,
Right.
because we had amazing, across genres and formats. We just had amazing personalities. Some of
Hmm.
the top names and people that went on to do national broadcasting work, pardon me, syndicated work,
Tom
came out of
Joyner,
Chicago.
Oprah,
Tom
right?
Joyner, Oprah,
Yeah.
Bill Curtis.
Hmm.
There are others whose names I'm forgetting right now. And there's some radio legends like Larry Lou Jack and
Hmm.
Ira Glass. For public radio people,
Right.
Ira Glass. I mean, just a wide range of. It was just a good town for radio, and
Right.
so it stoked that interest in me, and I never lost it.
Hmm. And see, that's kind of where I get to just reflecting a lot about my childhood because I remember being interested in, I wanted to be Oprah. At one point, I said, that's what I want to do. I want to go, I want to interview people, and I want to have a national platform where I'm sharing information with the world. And I remember saying that to someone and them saying, I want to be Oprah too. And me thinking, I can never do it that now because I need to be original. And I think a lot about those moments in my life where I changed my path because of external things that happened that I felt wouldn't make me unique. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I really regret that. And now, as I look at my younger cousins and just the young people, now my friends are having kids in my life. And I just want them to know it doesn't matter. Like, do what you want to do. It doesn't matter what anyone around you wants to do, and use the resources around you. So,
Yeah.
thanks for giving that background.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of gets me into what I want to start talking about with you, which is um, ultimately Finding Tamika. But before we get there, the reason I thought about Finding Tamika is because of what happened recently with Carlee Russell.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I mean, you're aware she was reported missing. A lot of people really blew up social media because she's a missing Black woman, right? And when that happened, I remember just feeling very connected to her because I saw I saw myself in her, right? I saw me, a young Black woman, not as young as I was, but still youngish Black woman, just doing something that you think is the right thing, and then you get kind of caught up, and now someone kidnaps you. In my mind, I couldn't sleep at night just thinking about what happened to her. Is she in a sex trafficking ring? Like, what's going on? So before I move on to Tamika, I want to talk a little bit about missing white women syndrome,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I guess what I'd like to say first is, and this may not be a popular point of view, but I actually
Mm.
still feel a lot of sympathy for Carlee.
Mm.
I believe that she probably, if what we understand to be the case is indeed true, which is that she sort of fabricated this whole missing person scenario from start to
Right.
finish. That's indicative of someone who's having, I think, a very severe mental crisis.
Mm.
And I've got to wonder, well, what precipitated that?
Hmm.
What stressors in her life or what trauma precipitated that? So
Right.
I actually have sympathy for her. I think that there are a lot of people in general, across racial lines, gender lines, sexual orientation lines, who deal with trauma. And I think there's a unique trauma that Black women deal with,
Mm.
because of the fact that one of the one of the toughest things in the world, in our nation at least, I should say, one of the toughest things in our nation is to be a Black person, is to be born Black.
You're right.
Now, to be born indigenous also
Mm-hmm.
is one of the toughest things in
Mm-hmm.
our nation. But certainly, being Black is tough. Born Black is tough. Being born a woman is one of
Mm-hmm.
the toughest things in our nation and in the world. And so I can only imagine what kinds of things she has had to deal with and she's been subjected to
Mm-hmm.
that have led her to this point in her life. So I feel sympathy for her. Now, having said that, I'm not saying that I'm dismissing what she did.
Mm-hmm.
That has to be dealt with. It's serious. And it certainly undermines and feeds into the very thing that you talked about, Shireen, white women's missing white women syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
It feeds into that. And we know that, you know, while this young woman got a lot of media coverage, and probably, honestly, probably not so much because she went missing, at least this is my opinion, but because she said she saw a baby.
Yeah.
Because she saw a baby. And I think that immediately, that was by itself. And I think that immediately elicited a lot of sympathy from people and a
That's a good
lot of
point. Right.
curiosity and fears from a lot of people.
Right.
So I would say that what she did, unfortunately, it reinforces or justifies in the minds of a lot of people, the whole idea of devaluing missing Black women
Mm-hmm.
and valuing missing white women over missing Black women,
Mm-hmm.
or other women of color for that matter. So yeah, I have strong feelings about all of that, but I do believe that she deserves a lot more sympathy than I think she's been getting.
That's fair. And, as you say that, when I was looking things up about Carlee Russell, I found that there are actually two other women, Black women, that went missing last week. And I want to make sure I speak their names. Janiyah Duffy, she went missing in Georgia. She's a 15-year-old Black girl. And then Latasha Coleman, she's 46. She went missing in Mississippi. And I was looking at that and I thought about Carlee Russell, and I also thought about Rosa Parks because, of course, we hear about Rosa Parks, but what we're finding now, I remember reading The Power of Habit and discovering that there was another Black girl that refused to get off the bus. Her name was Claudette Colvin. And my understanding is the movement said she's not the right person for us to use for a boycott right now.
Do you know why she was considered
Yes,
not to be the right person?
I do. My understanding is she wasn't considered to be the right person because she was pregnant. She was
Exactly.
15, right?
Exactly.
And I
Exactly.
know there are a lot of people that talk about it's because she was dark. That's not my belief based on right. It wasn't right. And I thought a lot about why I connected with Carlee specifically more than someone else that I hear goes missing. And I thought, you know what? I know that she sounded like she had a similar life to my life. And that made me a little bit more empathetic. And like you said, I mean, she was helping a baby, which is what kind of made a lot of people feel like, oh my gosh, she's helping a poor kid on the side of the road. But I think that's really what it was for me. It felt like me, whereas I don't always connect to people that go missing, although I always feel empathy for them.
Sure.
So I just thought that was interesting, and I'm happy that you gave your opinion on everything and also gave her empathy because we're in an age right now where cancel culture
Yeah.
is very strong, and I hate it because as quickly as people were on this girl's side looking for her, they turned against her.
Yep.
And we don't know. Yeah, we don't know her story. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
That leads me to talking about Tamika Houston.
Yeah.
So I really want to talk about Finding Tamika, the podcast that you wrote. And if you can kind of give an overview on Finding Tamika and what it's about.
Okay. So let me just correct one thing. I didn't write the script for the series. What I did was help to produce it, and I'm one of the co-creators as well.
Okay.
So the Finding Tamika podcast, and Audible actually doesn't call those audio products podcasts. They call them Audible originals, but everybody else calls them podcasts.
Right.
So I'm going to say podcast for the purpose of our conversation. There were 4 of us who created it, and 5 of us who actually produced it. So the 4 creators are Erica Alexander, who's the host of the series and who is a well-known actress and producer and director in Hollywood. Rebecca Howard, who is Tamika's aunt, and Rebecca is a lawyer and a public relations, I guess I'll say public relations consultant or professional. And also, just as a reference point for people, she's married to Desmond Howard, who is the Heisman Trophy winner, NFL Hall of Famer, who is on ESPN's College Game Day, if you're a fan of college football.
Okay.
Ben Arnon is Erica's partner in business and life, and he's the 3rd producer, and then myself.
Okay. Thank you.
And then we were joined by a gentleman named James T. Green as a producer, even though James didn't create the podcast, wasn't involved in that part of the process. He came on board to help with production, and the unique sound of Finding Tamika can really be credited to James and to Erica.
Okay.
Both of them as script writers, and James as he oversaw the overall production process, the sounds and the feel of it, and the score, the music score, all of that. All of that. I mean, there were people that worked under him and with him, but he was sort of the point person for all of that.
That's really interesting, because as I was listening, it reminded me a little bit of Talking with Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell, his audiobook. In fact, I don't typically hear this type of sound. Okay, that's really cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. So how did you decide that this is something that you want to work on?
Well, one day during the pandemic, I was sitting right where I am here in my home office studio, and I was working on something and happened to glance up at the TV that I have here, and Desmond Howard, Rebecca's husband, was on television, and I thought, wow, I haven't seen Desmond in a while, and hadn't talked to Rebecca in quite a while. And so I just thought, let me just call Rebecca and see how she's doing, since we hadn't talked in a few years. And so I called her up and we chatted. And as we were chatting and talking, of course, we eventually started talking about Tamika, because that's how I got to know her. I got to know her as a journalist and broadcaster, interviewed her several times while Tamika was missing. And then, of course, after we found out what happened to Tamika. And so in the course of that conversation, it just hit me, because I'm in the podcasting business. I have other podcasts that I've created and produced and worked on and still do. And so I just thought, this would make a really great podcast. Let me see if Rebecca would be interested. So I asked her, and it just so happened that HBO had just approached her about participating in their series, Black and Missing, which was, covers the same basic territory, just sort of the plight of Black women who go missing and the plight of their families. And so she was very open to the idea. And so once I knew that, I called Erica. And when Erica and Ben and I finally got together to talk about it, and Erica is so thorough. I mean, she asks, 150 questions. But after she asked all of her questions, she said, I want to do this.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, yeah. She got it.
Mm-hmm.
So I brought, Rebecca, Erica, Ben, and I had a meeting together and started talking about everything, and
Mm-hmm.
that's how it happened.
Wow. And I would recommend everyone listen to Finding Tamika. It was so moving.
Thank you.
I know I started listening to it and I thought I would like listen in pieces over a few weeks, but I couldn't stop once I pressed play.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's great. I love
Yeah.
hearing that.
Thank you. But
Yeah.
her story and another one, there's something about knowing information about somebody that helps connect you with their story.
Hmm.
And so hearing about her family life, hearing about her, she sounded like such a sweet person, such a loving person, her friendships, it just helped make me more invested in her story. And even knowing the end result, I still found myself feeling like, oh my gosh, I wish they would just, be able to find her okay. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. Um, but research says that every year about 600,000 people are reported missing. Of those 600,000, 34,000 are people of color.
Hmm.
And after hearing that story and just kind of getting a little bit obsessive and going on Google and going down all these different paths, I found that there are just so many missing people of color, as that article for NPR stated, but even Black men that go missing. And I never thought about it. I've always felt very safe as a Black woman because I didn't think anyone would ever pick up anyone like me. I always
Hmm.
felt like I did. I always felt like, okay, I'm not the type of person that a trafficker is targeting, or
Hmm.
I've never heard, I didn't grow up hearing that Black women went missing. So I just never thought about it. You guys were kind of putting together the way that you were telling the story. What are some interesting facts that you discovered?
Well, I guess one thing I should say is that at the time that we were working on Finding Tamika in pre-production stages, we were very much convinced that um, women of color, Black women in particular, and that was our main focus, Black
Mm,
women, that they were. It was not uncommon for Black women to go missing,
mm,
and for it to be underreported. In
mhm,
fact, I'll just say this: there is a foundation called the Black and Missing Foundation that has a very strong social media presence, and they have a podcast that they've also launched. The Black and Missing Foundation. If you like them on Instagram, you follow them on Instagram, what you'll find is that, as you just said, there are a lot of Black people, women
mm,
and men, who
mm,
go missing on a regular basis. It's
mhm.
stunning. It's really stunning how many there are. And across age ranges. I mean, from toddlers to seniors.
Right.
It's a phenomenon that is disturbingly common, and often there are not happy endings. I mean,
Mm,
sometimes there are, but often there aren't happy endings. So I would start there, in terms of things that we came across that we sort of reinforced in our minds.
mm,
In Tamika's case, I guess I'll say another thing that was fascinating or educational, is that it's very easy. It's a lot easier than we may think for someone to go missing, even when they
mm.
have people that are in their lives on a regular
Right.
basis.
Right.
And whether it's loved ones or family members or friends,
Mhm.
it's just remarkably easy to blink your eye and somebody's gone.
Yeah.
And for me, and I think really for all of us who worked on the project, it reinforces the idea that we really need to reinforce in the minds of our loved ones the idea of staying connected.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say this is especially, I mean, my feeling is it's especially true when it comes to younger people, but it
Mm-hmm.
probably applies to everybody.
Right.
We also just, there should be people in our lives who, if we're going to do something, if we're going to go somewhere, if we're going to be involved with somebody, people ought to know. We
Right.
shouldn't keep secrets. Our movement shouldn't be secret. Our
Mm-hmm.
relationship shouldn't be secret.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody should know because in Tamika's case, one of the challenges that her family faced and that the investigators faced was that the killer, and I don't even want to say his name,
Right.
the killer was not someone that was familiar to her family,
Mm-hmm.
and her best friend was not very familiar with him either.
Mm-hmm.
So it made it more difficult for the investigators to really see him as a suspect because they didn't really know he existed for quite a while.
Right. Wow. And I know as someone that gets kind of annoyed with my parents for always saying, "Where are you going?" I need to know. I can understand that secrecy.
Right.
I also know that I am currently in a space where I've cultivated a safe space with certain people in my life where they do always know where I am for that reason, because,
Mm.
I do, I guess as you get older, you get wiser. And I do realize that someone needs to know what's going on, who you're with, where you're going, just in case, because you never know what can happen.
Right. And I'm
Yeah.
not saying that we need to know all your business.
Yeah.
Your business is your business, but
You
we just
sound like
need.
Hyacinth.
I'm sure.
Uh,
but we do need to know,
right.
what our loved one, just at the very least, who's in your life,
Yeah. Yeah.
and if you're going to go to the Jamaica or Canada or wherever
Hmm.
with somebody, somebody needs to know that you're
Yeah.
going there with that person.
Right.
Again, what you do is your business,
Hmm.
but we just need to know. It's just it's a safety consideration.
That's very true.
Mhm.
Okay. So can you talk me through a little bit of your process? So you guys decide this is something that we're going to do.
Yeah.
Where do you start? Do you start by saying, okay, like asking her aunt what direction she wants to take this in, or do you start by doing research? What's the first step?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it did involve some conversations with Rebecca
Mhm.
that were designed to kind of gauge her comfort level and to understand, what her, I guess I'll say what her parameters were in even going down this path.
Mm,
And Rebecca was very, to her credit, you know, she herself was very open to a thorough exploration of this story,
mhm.
but also to her credit, she was very sensitive to her sister, Tamika's
Mhm.
mother,
Right.
and so she wanted to make sure that Tamika's mother was going to be comfortable with us doing this.
Mhm.
And so we got her blessing as well.
Mhm.
And so then as I recall, the next steps were really to just sort of flesh out what is the story,
Right.
So you basically create an outline
Mhm.
that becomes an episodic outline. So if we're going to tell this story, what is the story, and then how do we tell it? What are the key things we need to cover in this story? From and obviously you can't. Well, you start with her being missing, but then you really have to do a full-fledged start with, well, who is she? Or who
Right.
was she?
Yeah.
And so you move from who she was to the missing, to the dilemma, and the dilemma it created for the family, what the family's relationship, how the family had to begin to relate to law enforcement and to the media, and then there were some internal family issues that we also addressed. There were some other, I'll say, ancillary issues. One in particular that was a shock to me that I didn't know about, because, I'd known the story for years.
Yeah.
But I never knew until we started working on this podcast that there was a woman, and I can't remember her name right now, but there was a woman who was not related to the family, a white woman, an older white woman, who apparently was having visions about Tamika.
Yeah.
And that was very, when I first learned that, I thought, wait a minute, are we talking about a psychic or something? But that's not what it was. She wasn't a psychic. She was actually having dreams or visions. I'm gonna sort of treat those two as synonymous, as though they're synonymous, about Tamika and what she was, and about the situation, the circumstances, and some of what she was dreaming about or having visions about was information that actually helped in the investigation,
Right.
which was way out of my comfort zone.
It was a little airy. I think that was the moment I actually had to pause. And I come from a very religious, we share the same religious background.
Exactly.
And the things that I heard growing up, the things I was raised hearing, something like that was just completely outside of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
However, again, as I get older and I start to form my own belief system outside of what I was raised with, it is something that I've been actually more open to recently. So hearing that in a time where I've been more open to even thinking about the biblical connection with dreams and visions, and why wouldn't they still happen now? But we're just not comfortable talking about those things. Like, we're not as comfortable talking about it now as we are reading about it then.
Right.
So at that moment, I did actually pause for a few hours. I'm like, whoa, this is a little bit heavy, and I need to really kind of sit with this before I can keep going, because it helped with the case. It's what ultimately led them to where she was.
Right. And you can't, and that's what I had to do too. I also talked it over with one of my minister friends, and I just came to the conclusion that, first of all, the story is the story. So whatever it is what it is. Secondly, the reality is, even though it's outside of my comfort zone, I do believe in a world in which there are supernatural occurrences.
Right.
Occurrences that defy, that can only be explained spiritually. They can't be explained through science, or tangible, occurrences. So that being the case, that means there's room for, what this woman was experiencing. Right. Now, she may have interpreted it differently than perhaps I would interpret it, but the bottom line is there was still something supernatural going on.
Yeah.
And so, and I view it as a positive thing, not a negative thing, because again, it was designed to help. The supernatural occurrences, however you want to define them or describe them, were designed to help the investigators find out what happened to Tamika. So that was probably the most challenging aspect of this whole thing for me.
Right.
So you'll notice in the podcast, Erica had a certain way that she responded to it.
Mm-hmm.
And she framed it in a way that doesn't comport with my belief system,
Mm-hmm.
but that's okay. That's
Mm-hmm.
Erica's belief system.
You're right.
And Erica has every right to articulate, her perception of things and her understanding of things. And, since you and I are talking here today, I'm sharing with you my interpretation and application of
Mm-hmm.
things, which is
Mm-hmm.
different. I
Mm-hmm.
don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in spirits
You're right.
in that sense. But I do believe that there is a spirit world
Mm-hmm.
occupied by, in common language, occupied by angels and demons
Mm-hmm.
and an invisible God and so forth. So, I think there's room for all of us to bring our own sort of interpretations to the table in
Right.
trying to understand what happened.
You're right.
You know?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I also thought it was interesting what her friend told her aunt at the funeral, and then even her aunt's experience in the car with I think it was music playing. So there are just a lot of things that happen that Eric Alexander actually says, I think, in the beginning when everything starts. It's a wild ride that about to
Yeah.
go for. And I felt that. And also how things ended with her father. And it's just, it was pretty heavy. Everything that it's a lot for one person's life. It's a lot to go through. So thank you again for your part in sharing that story.
Thank you.
Yeah, what are things that people can do that are listening or watching right now to help missing women or men?
Mm-hmm. I think one of the first things is to go on social media and follow the Black and Missing Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the most important things you can do. It's a way to get really acclimated to the reality of the phenomenon
Mm-hmm.
and also to get the kind of information that could potentially help some of these people who are missing to be found.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're plugging into a network that's active, you know, in terms of people trying to find missing people.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing I would say is, again, we need to stress to all of our loved ones, no matter what age they are or gender, um, you know, um, let's really be connected. Let's not get isolated. If you're bringing somebody new into your life, you ain't got to tell all of us, but tell somebody.
Tell somebody.
Somebody needs to know.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to be able to say, okay, y'all may not have known it, but Dave was spending time with this woman over here.
Mm-hmm.
They need to know that.
I know something that I will do is send pictures to my best friend, send a license plate number. This is the full name. This is the phone number. Like, this is everything that you guys should know about the person that I'm with right now, just in case, God forbid, I don't think something's going to happen, but if something happens, this is all the information you should have.
I think that is excellent, especially when you're talking about somebody that you're just getting to know.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's exactly the way to do that.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So I would say those things, and then finally, I guess we should have more of these conversations, whether it's about whether the Finding Tamika podcast is the stimulus or whether some other situation is the stimulus. We need to have more of these conversations, and we really need to have conversations in particular about Black people. And I guess this isn't just a Black people problem. It's a societal problem, but I'm speaking now because we're talking about Finding Tamika, specifically about Black people. We need to become a lot more conversant of and interested in, conversant about and interested in mental health for ourselves. And I say this because the killer of Tamika Houston, the story that he told law enforcement was that they had an argument about money,
Mm-hmm.
and that he, in a fit of rage, took an iron that he was using to iron clothes and threw it at her or
Mm-hmm.
hit her in the head with it. Oh my God, what a horrible thing to do to somebody
Mm-hmm.
over an argument over money? Really?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to do something that could be fatal? And then on top of that, this guy, he doesn't try to get help for her.
Mm-hmm.
He takes her body, and she could have still been alive for all we know,
I think about that a lot.
and puts it in a closet.
Right.
Then he goes out, picks up an underage young woman,
Mm-hmm.
a late teenage, in her late teen years, brings her back to the very same apartment
Mm-hmm.
where he just killed Tamika, or at least, severely wounded her, and she's unconscious or dead in his closet, and he's having sex with this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the whole thing is just sick.
It is.
So you kind of have to wonder, and I struggle with this because I don't have any sympathy for him, and I struggle with that.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't tell you. One of my responsibilities as a producer was to reach out to him. So I actually reached out to him and corresponded with him,
Mm-hmm.
so that we could make sure that we got, his side, so to speak, for the podcast. And so the letter that Erica was reading, in whichever episode it was, that had the killer speaking, was something that he sent me.
Mm-hmm.
He emailed to me, or maybe he mailed it. I can't remember now. I think he mailed it. He mailed it to me, I think. Something was wrong with that guy.
You're right.
I mean, he was horribly sick. So, yeah, we need to have some real conversations about mental health. We need to have some real conversations with boys, and about how to treat women.
Mm-hmm.
We need to have real conversations about people, and I'm going to speak now in a broader sense, encompassing the complexity of gender identity as we know it today,
Mm-hmm.
about people that present as male, whether they were born male or not, and how they treat people who present as female, whether they were born female or not. In same-sex relationships, the same conversation, because there's violence in some of those relationships too, just like
Right.
there is in heterosexual relationships. We just need to have that conversation about intimate partner violence,
Mm-hmm.
and how to be healthier people, so that in our relationships, whatever category they fall in, violence, the chance for violence is lessened and not escalated,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. With the knowledge that you have now, what's something that you would teach your son at a young age?
Well, don't ever hit a woman
Mm-hmm.
or a girl. You know, don't ever call her out of her name. Um, Treat, women, or and I'll even go a step further and say, women, whether they are cisgender or trans,
Mm-hmm.
treat them with the utmost respect, because as should be obvious to all of us, there is something uniquely special about women that warrants that,
Right.
just because of and again, I don't care if you're talking about cisgender or transgender. The female spirit is a special spirit.
Mm-hmm.
The female inclination is a special inclination, let alone the ability of cisgender females to give birth, to bring life into the world.
Right.
This, all of that is special, and it needs
Mm-hmm.
to be revered. Now, there are a lot of countervening attitudes and viewpoints in society that would challenge those things, and unfortunately, masculinity has become, I don't care what anybody says, masculinity has absolutely developed over time
Mm-hmm.
a very severely toxic aspect to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I say over time, but I think it's really been with us for centuries. It's just that, the way things have been portrayed, we didn't necessarily recognize it as such
Right.
until recent times.
Right.
So I would definitely try to encourage my son, and my son, and I think this is who he is today. Thank
Mm-hmm.
God. Just do not embrace the more toxic aspects of masculinity that are being promulgated in society.
Absolutely. Thank
Yeah,
you. I
yeah.
wanted to ask that for those with young sons that are raising them so they can kind of have a guide for what they should be saying. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks so much for talking about Finding Tamika. Is there anything that you're working on now that we can support?
Yes. Let me just run through a few things. First, let me also say real quickly, we were blessed in that Finding Tamika won 2 national awards.
Yeah.
The DuPont Columbia Award, which we were in the same class of awardees as 60 Minutes on CBS, The Washington Post, ABC News, CNN. So we were really proud of that.
Yeah.
We also won a Webby, which we're really proud of, and we were one of Audible's top nonfiction podcasts last year. In terms of current projects, I co-host and produce a podcast called Breathe, which I do with my pastor, Pastor Deblier Snell. And that is, he's the senior pastor of the Oakwood University Church and also the speaker director for a ministry called Breath of Life. And the Breathe podcast comes under the auspices of Breath of Life. I also co-host a podcast called Alabama Politics This Week. And every week, my co-host and I, Josh Moon, we analyze Alabama politics, which is, as you can imagine, a freaking mess right now.
Oh yeah.
And we
is
also
it close to Florida politics right now?
they're about neck and neck.
Oh yeah.
It's about neck and neck. And we interview newsmakers, politicians, newsmakers. We've had former Governor Siegelman on the show two or three times, Doug Jones, former U.S. Senator, bunch of people. So we do that show or that podcast. I've got one that we are developing now about the city that you used to live in, Huntsville, Alabama.
Right.
That we're developing called Hello Huntsville, that we think is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to take a look at what makes Huntsville special, unique, place to live, fun place to live, and look at it through the eyes of some of its more prominent citizens as well as those who are not so prominent. And so we're deep into production on that now and looking forward to that. I'm trying to think what else merits mentioning. For now, that's it.
Okay. A little birdie told me way back in the day, used to have a television show.
I did. Yeah. You were a little
yeah.
person back in those days. But yeah, I did I did a TV show on the CBS affiliate here in Huntsville called Talkback.
Mm-hmm.
And it was basically, I was the black liberal, and my co-host was the white conservative, and we had a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun debating politics and taking phone calls,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a lot of fun to do, but it was also it's kind of weird, to be honest with you,
Yeah.
to be just wherever you go, somebody is staring at you because they recognize you from television. It's just,
Yeah.
I don't know how the anchors, the news anchors, I don't know how they do it, because it was kind of weird to me. But yeah, I used to do that, and I also used to write for USA Today as an
Mm-hmm.
opinion columnist, and done some features for NPR. So I've got a lot of work out there.
Yeah. A few things, right?
Yeah, just a little bit.
I know Mindy Kaling in her book was it is I think it's Is Everyone Hanging Out Without Me? But she talks about how famous she dreams of being. And it's famous enough where she can go and like go to lunch and be at peace. And a few people come up and say, "Hey, I know you from this show," but not so famous that she's like a Michael Jackson or Beyonce and she can't like take two steps without everyone crowding her.
Right,
So that's what
right.
I thought of when you said that.
Well, people were always polite.
Yeah.
In fact, some people back in the talkback days, and I mean, people still come up to me today because
Mm-hmm.
I have enough of a media presence that people still come up to me today and will talk about hearing me on the radio or seeing me on TV. But back then, because it was weekly, it was just it was different. But people were always polite. Even the
Yeah.
ones who disagreed with me were polite.
Southern
So
hospitality.
yeah, that's right. That's right. Southern hospitality.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it also helped that they could tell that even though my co-host Brent Woodall, who's a great guy,
Hmm.
that even though we did not agree on politics, we actually liked each other as
Hmm.
people. And they could tell that we got along, because the vibe between us was intense. It was a fun vibe. And I think that
Right.
that helped a lot, I think.
I think that for my generation, or for me at least, I can't speak for everyone. That's something that I felt like I learned from Trump, actually. Because for so long you feel like, oh, this person does not have the same political affiliation that I do, which makes them horrible. And then Trump became president, and you saw people really expressing their different opinions and people on that side, on the Republican side, disagreeing with him. And it helped me connect with more people than I would have had he not been president. So I always say that's like the blessing of Trump for me, at least. Became more of an open person.
I like that. I like that. So there, even with that dark cloud, there's a silver lining. I
There's
like that.
always a silver lining. There's always something good you can look for, right?
That's right. That's
Yes.
right. That's right.
Well, thank you so much for agreeing to do this again. Thank you for having this conversation. And my hope is that people hear this, and I want to say we help find more missing Black women.
Yes.
Never know, or just Black people, or just people in general. If you
Yeah.
see something, say something, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to The Ignorance Project, and I hope you leave feeling enlightened.